title. First, mirror matchup complaint, question mark, exclamation mark. I think this is the first time in my entire life that someone has gone through the trouble of writing a title as well as capitalizing certain words. Like this is a YouTube thumbnail, but I guess in a way it worked because here we are. All right, Captain, I bet you've never seen a complaint quite like this before. I am confirming for my Terran and Zerg brethren from behind enemy lines that the carrier is indeed a brain-dead, idiotic unit, especially in PvP. My opponent starts the game with some, what can only be called NA nonsense, which I held reasonably. Sure, I probably didn't need a forge. I cut a few workers in the defense, but my expo is faster, and I scout that he gets a forge, Stargate, and cuts Warpgate, so I figure I'm in no threat for a while. I figure the best response is to rush out Blink and deny a third while getting my own and eventually snowballing to a much larger army. But I forgot. He can just turtle on batteries and cannons, crawl to a much later third, and by the time that I scout carriers in production, I know I am on a ticking time bomb. There's no response for this. I can't build a critical mass of Stalkers to ever engage since he has Stasis, plus Phoenix Lift, plus batteries, and I can't ever transition to Tempest in time since he will be so far ahead in upgrades and Phoenix carrier count. I try, but I've lost so many proms at that point, it's futile. What is the correct response besides rolling over and getting the loop? What is the timing I can hit? If there's none, feel free to use this and dethrone max specs in PvP. You deserve it, King. This titled imbalance complaint form was sent in by Riley Reid from the North American server, who is in the Masters League with 4,400 MMR, basically asking, is the carrier imbalanced or do I suck? All right, here we go. Riley Reid versus Hesse Jimbo. As Hesse Jimbo is sending out a probe rather quickly. Now, of course, we did read in the imbalance complaint form that it was some NA nonsense in the early game. So I'm very curious what this is going to be. There's a pylon at home. There's no force yet, so it can't really be a cannon rush. Or at least it would be a very weird timing for a cannon rush. Or at least for that probe to be out on the map. It's going to be a pylon over here in the natural. I think this is a reasonable response. After seeing a pylon go down in your natural, you pull one worker. Maybe you pull a second. Yeah, no, I'm completely down for this. I think this is a good response here by Riley so far. We now get a gateway. Maybe a cannon. You could still... Yeah, okay. Second gate. Now, this is actually kind of an interesting setup here that we see. And I think it might be worthwhile to just pause here for a second and to actually analyze the situation properly. Okay, so Riley Reid over here has this gateway 35 out of 46 seconds down, while my man Hesse Jimbo has this gateway 21 out of 46 seconds down, and the second gateway 14 out of 46 seconds. That means that the Zealot, well, what did I say, the times? It's going to be about 15 seconds faster here for our blue Protoss player. 15 seconds faster with a Zealot, okay? Now, as a response, something that you can do is just throw down a second gateway yourself, so you just mirror what your opponent is proxying in your natural, except you're just going to have it much faster because your first gate is quicker, so you're going to have a bigger Zealot count. Your opponent lost a lot of mining time, and they're going to be losing these buildings as well, and then you'll thus be very far ahead. So you yourself already said, Riley, that you thought that the forge was an incorrect play, and I agree. It should have been a second gateway. I actually think, in reality, that a second gateway isn't even necessary, because I think with a decent pro pool and with a Zealot chrono, you should be fine. But I don't mind a very fast second gateway chronoing that first Zealot. I mean, this full wall is definitely quite smart as well. And now that you know that you have the full wall, something else you could do is just cancel the forge last second and replace it with a cybernetics core over here. Then you know for sure you're going to get this pylon down and not a single Zealot is going to ever get pushed out of these gateways. And in that case, I think the game is just honestly pretty much over. Instead, you let the forge finish. Your cybernetics core starts later than your opponent. And we actually see Hesse Jimbo over here with the chrono boost on the Nexus as well. So actually getting quite a few probes. So yes, this looks bad for our man Hesse Jimbo, but it's not as bad as it should have been. This game should have practically been over, either due to superior production here for Riley, or just because the eco lead should have been too big. And, the cost of losing these two gateways, or this gateway and the pylon, should have been way too large. Nexus does go down here for Riley, but we also see the Nex going down on the other side for Hesse. And that means that we have, honestly, a fairly even game, with the only downside here for Hesse Jimbo being that there is no gateway at home. So this is something that people don't realize, okay? People will look at a situation like this and they'll think to themselves, okay, I stopped the rush. I am now naturally ahead because I stopped the rush. But that's not how it works. You can be ahead in certain things, but be behind in others. Right now, for example, we actually see that Hesse Jimbo is up 2 workers and only has a slightly slower Nexus over here. So the only thing that Hesse Jimbo right now is lacking is ground defense, because he's not going to have any type of gateway units out. This is the area in which Riley is going to be ahead, and this is the area in which he will need to kind of capitalize in order to get further ahead or to stay ahead. If you don't capitalize on the only lead that you have and you chrono boost a Stalker, build a battery for God knows why, like, this makes no sense. This battery is absolutely idiotic. This is very, very dumb. It makes no... Like, there's no gateway. You're scouting that there's no gateway. The first threat that's gonna come here could only be an Oracle. That means that a battery on the low ground here is completely nonsensical. In no world does this make any sense whatsoever. This is actually idiotic. This is 100 minerals wasted. It could have been a way faster second gateway, which would have been great to have to kind of match up with Warp Gate finishing up. You can get a lot of Stalkers. Maybe you can then pressure with Stalkers because your opponent doesn't have any freaking ground units. If you would have moved across the map with your first Stalker, chrono boosted your second Stalker, maybe you could have forced out way more cannons. Maybe you could have killed a bunch of probes as well. These are all things that definitely coulda, woulda, should have happened had you just moved across the map with your Stalkers, which is where your lead is in. Right now, you don't actually have a lead in very much of anything. I think your tech is actually better because your opponent is opening up with Phoenixes for whatever reason, and you're playing Twilight Council. So I think your tech is nicer, but you're not producing workers properly. You're not chrono boosting workers properly either. I think the chrono boost went on the Twilight Council here. Once again, you're still not chronoing. On the other side of the map, well, we have quite a few workers, 33 versus 30. So we actually see that Hesse Jimbo is now up in economy, still kind of down when it comes to map control, because there's only a single Phoenix out. There's going to be Blink soon enough. There's going to be a lot of Stalker. So Phoenixes shouldn't be capable of dealing a whole lot of damage. And taking a third base, playing pure air units, is practically impossible. Like, it is really, really difficult to do. It is really difficult to do, to take a third base when you're messing Phoenixes against someone that opened up with straight Blink. If this was Stargate into Blink, then maybe it's possible. But going straight Blink against your straight Phoenix, that is freaking hard. Okay, now we get 2 more gateways. And here you always got to be careful as a toss to not fall into the MGMS mistake. This stands for the more gates, more strong. Simple little acronym there for the Protoss players. Now, the MGMS, the more gates, more strong fallacy, is one where you believe that just because you build more gateways, you actually have a stronger push. This often ends up not being correct. So if we're here maximizing for a timing with these 2 gateways, we should be hitting in, well, first warp in is going to be in 20 seconds from now, then the next warp in 23 seconds after. So you probably want to hit in about 50 seconds from this point on out. And you want to hit constant warp ins, and you can't build a third base, okay? What we're seeing here already, which is kind of what I expected, is we're seeing a Dark Shrine being added in. We're now seeing a cannon being built as well, and we see a probe moving over towards the third base. So Gateway's now finishing up, and they should morph, or they should warp a Stalker immediately. If the goal is to push, then have as strong push as possible. Every single warp in needs to be hit. Instead, we get a Nexus. Now, if you had wanted a Nexus, what you could have just done is build the Nexus before you build Gateway 3 and 4. You haven't used them yet anyway. You've only been using these 2 gates a single time. Right now, I don't even think you should be using these 2 gateways, because you should be focusing on getting more probes out, getting more upgrades out. I pray to the Lord that you end up canceling this Dark Shrine. So really, these 2 gateways, these 300 minerals you invested in here, so far haven't benefited you one bit. They've been completely useless up until this point. Completely useless. You could have had more units, taking a faster third base, chrono boosting more probes, and just having continuous production out of these 2 gateways. I would have much preferred it. And don't forget, this is not a silver or a diamond or a gold or a platinum game we're watching. We're watching a high Masters Games 4400 MMR on the NA server. This is some of America's finest, okay? These are some of the great minds that America has to offer. Now we're seeing, look at this, 3 more gateways being added in. Despite these 2 gates not even having been used once, we see 3 more gates. What would I have preferred here, you might ask? Well, let's once again just analyze the situation. This is something that people tend to forget to do and something that Riley definitely is forgetting. What he needs to do at this point is realize, hey, my opponent has an army that can't freaking kill me. Phoenixes can harass, they can defend, but they can't kill people aggressively. It is impossible. What you could have done, rather than building these 3 gates, is take a really fast fort base as well. Continue chrono boosting worker, maybe even getting a second fort of some sort, and then maybe maximizing a very efficient 4-base timing attack, where you have 75 workers, you're going to get up to 12 gateways, which are constantly pumping out units. And you can do all of this while still putting on more pressure than you currently are doing, because you literally haven't warped in a single unit, except for the sentry maybe, ever since you added gateway 3 and 4, which once again have been completely useless. I'm afraid that gateway 5, 6 and 7 are going to have a very similar fate here and are going to be completely useless. Even gonna throw down an 8 gate, a Templar Archives over here. I much rather would have seen you get more of a lead when it comes to the eco and continuous Stalker production from a low gateway count. More workers, almost always the answer. When you're dealing with someone that is turtling hard, you want low production, high worker production, and maximum amount of unit production as well on the facilities that you already have. I'm not entirely sure how this is possible either. You literally have nothing to do. You're not harassing, you're not on the other side of the map, and yet your opponent flies in, manages to kill 10, 12 workers all at once. You're literally, your only job in the past 6 minutes has been to stop this, and the one time your opponent decides to move out, you kill 2 Phoenixes and lose freaking 15 workers, which is kind of impressive by itself. Your opponent, by the way, still stuck on 2 bases, but I'm not so worried about that because your opponent also has more income at the moment. 1800 minerals a minute, 600 gas. Don't ask me how that is possible. I guess you're not mining any gas from your third, and you just simply have less probes than your opponent. Now you start moving across the map, and you've managed to, well, achieve the remarkable feat of having less stalkers than your opponent has Phoenixes out 8 minutes and 40 seconds into the game. This is definitely something that you could be very proud of, because I haven't quite seen that before. Walk into a stasis with half of your stalkers, very nice. Phoenixes turn around. First Void Ray and Carrier show up, and you basically lose your entire army here for free. I've seen a lot of bad responses over the years, Riley. A lot of bad responses over the years to Airtos. But I think this one is honestly one of the greatest bad responses that I've seen in my life. You're not rushing out eco. You're not really going for a timing attack. You kind of play a low eco style with very little units and no timing attack. There is no prism or any type of reinforcement. It looked like you were going for a 3-base all-in, yet you had no way to reinforce this push. It looked like you were going for an Archon Zealot push, which I honestly wouldn't have minded so much. Archons are really, really sick against Phoenixes because they can be lifted. They have insane splash damage. Zealots are good at dealing with cannons and batteries as well. I wouldn't have minded a proper 10 or 12 gate timing from 3-base even. I think that might have been okay if you hit as the 3rd base is going up, but you did none of those things. You just literally sat here, got no eco, took insane damage from your opponent, and then you walked into a stasis. Now, it's possible that I've missed something else that you've done, but in my mind, these are the only things you've done so far. Now your opponent has carriers out. Now, at this point, I would say you're almost in an unwinnable position because your eco is still completely garbage. Your opponent still has a lot of potential eco kill in these Phoenixes, and the main army is probably stronger than your main army. So even without the Phoenixes, if every single Phoenix would die and trade in all of its energy for probes, which I think you can you can definitely do, the eco is so much better here for Hesi Jimbo, and the army is also going to be much better for Hesi Jimbo. Turtle and make carriers. I'm not sure if this is a complaint or if this is like a You know, just a statement. It's like just telling himself, turtle and make carriers. That's what it's like. He's using the general chat here as a kind of a way of journaling. He has a diary that he can always read. He does this in all of his replays, my man Riley. Fantastic stuff. Fantastic stuff. All right, 4 carriers out. 4 more on the way. +1 armor as well coming in. Before +3, I'm not a huge fan of. Big blink forward. Once again, less stalkers than phoenixes. Carriers are still in the air. Not entirely sure what the point is of this. You weren't even trying to deny it for this. I guess you were trying to deny this, but you knew you had less of an army. Here comes a Stargate transition. This is the famed Stargate transition that you said would be too late because transitioning into Tempest is useless. And yeah, at this point, well, technically anything you could be doing is fairly useless. And the reason for that is because you're completely dead. I don't think it is possible to have responded much worse to this entire setup, which is kind of weird because I feel like I say that like every other week. So at some point we need to make like one of these brackets between people's responses to certain things and then make them fight against each other. And we get a team of like 3 judges and we figure out who truly had the worst response against carriers. But I honestly do believe that this is pretty high up there. Like this has been fairly mediocre. Please blink into this just for a comedic effect. Okay, too bad. Just gets everything lifted instead. It feels like finally now though, Riley Reid here is figuring out that getting a good eco might actually be worth it. Starts running around with stalkers, except it's just way too late. Like it's simply just way too late. This should have been done years ago, like 5-6 minutes ago, and could have done all of this as well while denying third bases. That is the funny thing to me. Minimum amount of stalkers, maximum production, minimum amount of probes. Like literally the opposite of everything you want. Like you know how sometimes they say that a monkey would have performed better than you because monkeys, whenever they get a 50-50, they'll at least pick something. So there's a 50% chance. A monkey wouldn't just have done slightly better than you. He would have completely destroyed you here when it comes to the choices. The monkey would have been fantastic. Yes, yeah, this game is completely over. We'll go over it one more time though, okay? In case you're wondering what the correct thing to do is against a carrier camp, or really this counts for any camping in general. Usually people that camp very heavily on 2 bases have very poor eco and they don't have the ability to establish a third base. If you're camping on 2 bases with mech or with airtos, it's also really difficult to move out on the map. Because the moment you move out on the map and your opponent counterattacks you, you're going to most likely be losing a base trade because of 2 facts. 1, the moment you move out and the opponent base trades you, it means that the opponent gets to shoot your buildings first. They initiate the base trade, so they start by killing your buildings. And second of all, because you've been camping on 2 bases, you have less bases, which means it's easier to clear all the buildings as well for the person who isn't camping. And this is also most of the time going to be the way to beat a turtling player, is by getting better eco yourself behind it, then getting a lot of often cheap units that if your opponent threatens to move out, you can base trade with. And then once you have your eco set up, you're on 85 workers, you get all your gases saturated and you start transitioning into the actual counter of your opponent's army, which in this case could either be Double Forge, Archon, Zealot, Stalker, and just A moving into your opponent's fort base the moment they try to get it with like 16 gates. If you have Double Forge, good upgrades, this can definitely work until Disruptors are out. At that point, you can just transition into Tempest. But the main thing here is that the eco needs to be very good and you need to try and deny your opponent's third base for as long as possible without really losing very much. And that would have been both of these things would have been possible had you stayed on way lower production, completely maximize that production by building stalkers again and again and again and again, maybe proxying 1 gateway across the map after your third base, so you have quicker reinforcements to that base. And then after you get your fort up and running, go up to 8 gases, charge with Archon, boom, you go for it, all good. Go up to 5 bases for all I care, just play a very patient game and go into Tempest, boom, also completely fine. The worst thing you can do is having some half garbage Stalker attack walking into a stasis ward, losing your entire army, while 2 Archons are still idling at home because you didn't think of building a prism or a gateway and a pylon. This is absolutely not the way, my dear friend. Like I said, you've done absolutely every decision you had, every path of the tree of choices that you had, you went in the wrong branch. You know, the rotten branch, you fell down the tree. And that's just how it is. And you, my dear friend Riley Reid, you suck. That's just the way it is. All right. That's also the way it is for this episode. And that's going to be it for me. I hope you did enjoy this beautiful game of StarCraft 2 and this IODIS replay. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, send in your own IODIS if you do believe that something is truly imbalanced. And we'll get back to you soon. Ciao, ciao.